Hey there, drone fans. Rick here again from Drone Valley. In today's clip, I'd like to discuss the upcoming changes the FAA is considering for our hobby and strongly encourage everybody who's watching this clip to take a minute, sit down, read through the regulations. It's only a couple of pages. Put your thoughts down on paper and send those off to the FAA, because this is your one shot to let them know as a flyer what you think about the changes they're about to make. And I think that's a really healthy process, that they have to open this up for public discussion to let them know that maybe some of the stuff they're considering isn't really something that would benefit the hobby in general. And if enough of us send those comments in and let them know, like, hey, we think you're doing some cool stuff here, but if you did this, it'd be even cooler, that could affect their opinion. And I guarantee you that even though you might be thinking, Rick, you're crazy, you're tilting at windmills, no one there is going to care what a flyer thinks. They absolutely do. And I can give you one example of that. When they came out with the proposal for the 400-foot limit, initially that proposal said there isn't any quad that's going to fly above 400 feet under any conditions. And a lot of us said, wait a minute, that doesn't make a lot of sense. What if I'm surveying a building or a tower that's 300 feet or 500 feet tall? I can't get over that building. So the FAA thought about it and said, you make a lot of sense there. Not me, but everybody who wrote in. And they said, we will relax that so that if you're within 400 feet of a building, you can fly to the height of the building plus 400 feet above it, so you can do your surveying of that building to look at the roof or maybe inspect a tower that's 1,000 feet high. So those kind of changes are something that were affected by hobbyists like us. These two rules, I think in general, are wonderful rules that they're going to implement. Gives us a lot more flexibility in how we fly, but it's really important that if you have thoughts and concerns, that you sit down and send those into them, because time is short on this. The deadline is Monday the 15th. I've talked about it before in the channel, but I'm making one last minute pitch to everybody out there to just give it some thought and send the comments. Doesn't have to be anything long. Could just be a 1 or 2 word sentence. You can do it electronically online, so it's very easy to do, but I think it's super important to do it because, to me, there are hundreds of thousands of flyers out there, and I checked this morning and there's 100 comments. And what that tells me as an FAA guy, if I were in their seat, is maybe the hobby's not that engaged, or maybe people don't care, we'll just do what we want. I don't know why we're wasting our time talking to the public. So I'm hoping we can turn that 100 comments into 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 comments that come in that say, compliment them if you think they're doing a good job. You guys are doing a great job. These are the things I would change with the 2 rules you guys are considering right now. And I'll give you some thoughts on what I think should be changed and what I like about it and what I think might be tweaked a little bit to help us. And I'll get into that in a minute. But let's start with the process. So any government agency that's in charge of making public rules like this has to go through what's called an NPRM process, or Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. So it's a statutory requirement for them to open this up for public conversation. Time is short on that. Like I said, it ends on Monday. Once that door closes, you can complain all you want after the rule has been issued, but it's a difficult thing to change after they've asked you for your opinion and you haven't offered it. So I'm not going to preach here, but I think we really have to group together as a hobby and say, now's the time. We have a nice long weekend. Sit down, have a cup of coffee, take 10 minutes, type out an email and send it off. And I'll put links below to both the rulemaking proposals and how you can send that email in. So let's get into some of the conversations around the 2 rules. Right now, the 2 rules they're considering, which I think are great because they're expanding what we can do in the national airspace. The first one has to do with night flights. Right now, for commercial flyers and anybody flying outside of a club really can't fly at night. You can't. You just can't put a quad up. So anything between civil twilight and sunrise, you can't fly a quad without a waiver. Now, if you're a 107 flyer, you can apply for a waiver and put it up at night, but that's difficult to do. It's a pain to do. So with this new rule, they're going to change it so that you can fly at night, which is a great thing. The second rule they're changing is flights over people. Now, that's been a pretty restrictive thing where you can't really fly over people, you can't fly near crowds, you can't do a lot of stuff that commercial flyers would like to do. They'd like to get up in the air and actually fly over people safely, obviously, but be able to do that without a waiver for 107s. So those are the 2 rules they're changing, and I'll get into some details about what they're proposing and how it's changing. And I want to, out of the gate, say, I know some of you are thinking, Rick, I'm a recreational flyer. Why do I give a damn about what commercial flyers are doing? How does that affect me? Why am I wasting my time even watching your clip? And the honest truth is, because most of the changes that happen from the FAA are kind of test case. Remember, they're very slow to adopt. Even though technology is racing ahead, the FAA is slow on purpose to be careful about the changes they make to not endanger the public and endanger the national airspace. So I think that's a really pragmatic way to do it, to take your time and sort of go through it slowly. But they want to test it a little bit. So I think a lot of the changes you're going to see, this night flights, this flight over people, even flight beyond visual line of sight, will probably come to the Part 107 pilots first for a period of time, and then they'll release them to recreational flyers. So it is important that we get that statute on the books, because whatever is put in for 107 flyers is definitely going to trickle downstream for recreational flyers as well. So it doesn't matter what you're flying, get your opinions heard on this one. It's really important. All right, so let's talk about night flights first. So right now, as a commercial pilot, I have to get a waiver to fly at night. What this new proposal is going to say is that I don't need a waiver anymore. As a 107 pilot, I can fly anytime I want at night, as long as two things are true. Number one, I've got lighting on the quad for 3 statutory miles that people can see that quad. Now, what's nice is they're not at this point talking about what kind of lighting, where it has to be on the quad, how it's attached, how bright it has to be. It just has to be visible for 3 statutory miles. I like that because it gives me the flexibility of buying a lighting solution for my quads that fits my needs, fits my budget, and I can put it on the quad wherever I want. So I like that part of it. They're going to also require Part 107 pilots to take a test, and not an additional big test, but if you pass your 107, there'll be another small section that talks about night flights, because the physiology of flying at night and the ability to land it and find it in the air and find your home position is a whole lot different. So I think it's important that if you're going to fly a lot at night, that you take that test, you study the material, and you pass it. So I'm totally okay with that. I think that one thing that I would change about that, though, number one, I'm a fan of clubs still being able to fly at night. I have no problem with an organized CBO, community-based organization like a lot of you belong to, AMA-sponsored kind of fields, have the ability to fly at night, because they do an excellent job of monitoring their people and putting rules in place. They're a wonderful group of people. So leave that alone. Let them fly at night. That's great. I also think that they should eliminate the need for night flight lighting for smaller flights, like low altitude flights. Because if you're an FPV flyer and you fly in any of those contests where it's a dark room and you're flying through targets and things like that, why do you need lights on your quad? You're not going to be over 30 feet, 50 feet high. It's not going to impact an aircraft. So I think the one thing I would add to it is to say, don't require the lighting on low altitude flights, and maybe put a ceiling on that of 50 feet or 100 feet so that FPV flyers that are under that ceiling can fly without worrying about the lights. Those are the only things I would build in there. So for my comments to the FAA, they're going to reflect the fact that I agree 100% that a 3-mile statutory limit on lighting is a good thing. I think you should probably have an additional test for 107 pilots to take, but let me say a little bit more about that. I don't think you should require us to take the entire test over. I think if you passed your 107, you should be able to take just the section on night flying. Now, if you haven't taken your 107 test, build it in. So my master test that I take for 107 or my renewals has that as part of the main test. But if I already passed the test and I've spent $150 to take the test, I don't want to spend another $150 to take it again just to pass that one little section. Plus, I'm not sure I'll pass the big part, right? I haven't studied in a while. But anyway, so make it a separate part that I can take, and make it online. Why do you have to go to a testing center and have me travel all the way to an airport to take that test? So my recommendation would be, I'm fine with the test, just don't make it a retest on everything. Make it a separate test and make it easy for me to take. And then last, eliminate the need for night lights, if you will, for flying at low altitude. My number would be 50 feet. I think that's fine. I don't think many FPV racers are going above 50 or 100 feet, or make it 100. You guys decide what you want there. All right, so that's the night flying part. The next part's a little bit more complicated, because flights over people, it's kind of a scary thing, right? That's the one thing that terrifies the public, is a quad failing, falling out of the sky and bopping somebody on the head and causing injury. So I think they're looking at sort of flights over people as different categories of danger. Let's put it that way. So they've got 3 categories: category 1, 2, and 3. And I've got some thoughts on what category 4 should include. There isn't one yet, but I'm gonna suggest they have one. So category 1 is small quads that are under 0.55 pounds. Things like your Spark. Put that thing up in the air. I'm sorry, the Tello. This is the Spark here. The Tello. You put the Tello up in the air. This thing falls. It hits somebody on the head. It's annoying. It's not going to hurt anybody, even if it falls from 100 feet. You know anything about physics, you know that there's a certain acceleration. I won't get into all that, but there's a terminal velocity of an object falling that's not going to kill somebody if it comes down. That's why when you shoot a bullet up in the air, it's typically not fatal. If it comes back down, it'll bop you on the head. But at any rate, I'm getting aside here. The Tello should be permitted. So anything under half a pound is a good thing. The problem is they've cut it off at a half a pound. I don't think there's a gigantic danger to go to something a little larger like a Spark. So my one suggestion, food for thought, would be in that category 1. I don't know where you came up with the 0.55 pounds. I know you've done some studies based on old data you had that ironically or weirdly is based on rocket parts and spaceship parts and shrapnel. I mean, these are kind of like scary things that'll come falling out of the sky. These guys are nowhere near as dangerous as a big chunk of metal falling from the sky. So I would bump that 0.55 up to a pound maybe. That would at least eclipse, quads like this that I think are a lot of fun to fly. and she really shouldn't be under that restriction of you can't fly this guy over people because it could kill somebody. The second thing they built in is Category 2 and 3. Now, I do agree with their assessments there. Those would include quads that are over half a pound. So larger quads like the Evo or the Mavic 2 or anything larger, Phantom, Inspire, things like that, they do, to me anyway, strike me as a little bit more dangerous because something like that falling from 200 feet, 300 feet up could pose a danger there. So what they're saying in those two categories and the way they differentiate between them. So the Category 2 and Category 3 are both over 0.55 pounds. So anything more than half a pound is either Category 2, Category 3. And the differentiation between them is a thing called feet pounds. So the amount of inertia or the amount of kinetic energy, which again, if you study physics, it's energy in motion. As these things come down, the kinetic energy can't be in Category 2 any more than 11 feet pounds. And in Category 3, it's 25 feet pounds. I don't know where those numbers came from. I know they came from studies they did years and years ago, probably in the 60s, which are outdated because Assure, which is an organization that does that kind of testing nowadays, has tested sort of dangerous things about drones falling out of the sky, and their numbers are way higher. Their kinetic energy numbers for drones, because they're softer and they're made of sort of fungible material that bends when it hits things, it's not rigid like a piece of shrapnel, are less dangerous falling out of the sky. So I would hope that they would increase that quite a bit. So 11 foot-pounds maybe is not the right amount of kinetic energy to have there, but at least take a look at that again from the Assure perspective, which is current data. It's based on quad type of interactions with people, and I think it's a little safer to sort of raise those limits because for me, I want to fly larger quads, I want to fly over people, and I want to fly safely over people. So I'm very cautious whenever I put a quad up that I'm staying away from people. If you give me permission from the FAA's perspective to now fly over people and film over people, I'm going to be very careful about where I put it up, and I'm going to mitigate those circumstances. But that poundage, that foot poundage of 11 versus 25, I think is way low. So one of the recommendations I would say, and don't get into the details of it, but maybe say to them, use the Assure study. That's the most current, related, germane data we have as far as what the injury might be from something that's fallen out of the sky. The second thing, which is a little bit trickier, is that Category 2 and 3, they're leaving it up to the manufacturer on how they mitigate that kinetic energy. So they're not saying you can't have a heavy quad, because kinetic energy is based on the weight of something versus the velocity of something versus how fungible it is or how spongy it is when it bangs into something, how much of that kinetic energy is actually transferred during impact. So the manufacturers could build these things out of styrofoam. That'd be horrible for flight characteristics because the wind would take it and it'd be gone, but they could do that. They could make it, maybe crush panels on it. They could do other things to sort of reduce that kinetic energy, but they're leaving it up to the manufacturers. I think that's a good thing. So I'm going to say in my response, number one, I think your kinetic numbers are off. I think they can be way higher and still be safe. Use the Assure study. Second, I applaud the fact that you're leaving it up to manufacturers to do that compliance testing on whatever number you settle on and let them be creative about the way they mitigate that kinetic energy. I think that leaves the cleverness of the manufacturer beholden to fixing that problem, and I think it's a wonderful thing. They also mentioned Category 2 and 3. They can't have spinning blades exposed. That's a little tricky, but I don't mind for a second if I'm flying over people and you tell me from the FAA's perspective, I got to put cages on my propellers. Not a big deal. If I'm flying over people, that's one of the things I'm going to do as my pre-flight checklist is to say, I know I'm going to be flying over a crowd. Thank you for letting me do that. I'm putting cages on my propellers. So I have no problem with that whatsoever. The one thing I do have a problem with in Category 2 and 3 is that they're considering not allowing us to fly over moving vehicles. Now that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That's the one I would protest, and I'll have some comments about that in my response to them, which I'm still crafting. I should have gotten it out sooner, but I'm working on it. I'll have it out today. I actually sent one already. I'm going to send a second one. But the problem with flying over, I should say, not the problem with flying over moving vehicles is that I can't fly over people that are unprotected. I get that. But if you're under some type of protective covering, I can fly over you no problem because the drone falls out of the sky. It's going to hit the roof or whatever you're under and you're safe. Kind of the same thing with the car. I mean, if you're in a car, you're protected from anything falling out of the sky. And I think what they're getting at is it's distracting to fly over cars, as if someone's going to pay attention to that and not pay attention to the road. I mean, honestly, there's so many distractions between billboards and airplanes and birds flying around and texting and all the nonsense you shouldn't be doing in your car when you're driving, that the drone is less of a distraction, especially if I'm over top of the car. I could see it being a distraction if I was flying next to the car, because that's kind of unique and I'm going to watch that drone. But over top, they're not going to actually see me. And if it does fall from the sky, physics would tell you that if I'm at 100 feet and the car's moving, by the time I come down, that car's not going to be there. So I don't know how you set that up as a rule. I think that's a bit overprotective, I guess it is. And that's the one I'm going to protest in that space. So if you're going to send comments in about that second category about flying over people, I would recommend you definitely protest that prohibition from flying over cars, because even though today I can fly over a road where there are no cars, that's going to really restrict what I do in maybe more urban areas where I'm flying, where there's a highway that I have to cross to get to the other side. Do I land my quad, cross the highway, put the quad back up again? I mean, I'm going to have to fly over a road where there could be cars. So I think it's really restrictive that they've got that provision built in. So that's pretty much it. I don't want to take too much time in this. I know I rambled a little bit, but I wanted to try and get all my thoughts out. You can listen to this. You can sit down and craft your own response to the FAA. Use some of my thoughts if you think they make sense. But again, the only thing I'm trying to get across here is that time is short. And this is really important because these two rules fundamentally dramatically change the way we fly our quads, good or bad, right? And if you're happy with the way they are, have a cup of coffee and don't worry about it. But I would suggest that if you sit down, think about it a little bit. Some of the stuff I'm talking about may resonate with you, and I would recommend you put it down on paper or in an email. I'm an old guy. Put it in an email and send it off to the FAA and say, hey, thanks an awful lot for considering our opinions. Here's what I think you should do. And even if it's just a thank you for considering our opinions, I would love to see that number be 10,000 responses, 100,000 responses, because if I'm sitting in the offices of the FAA and I say, we're going to make some changes, let's see how the public reacts to this, the flying public reacts to this, and I get 100 back, that gives me the right to go out and do what I want to do. They don't really think we care, and I know we care. So again, I'm pleading with you to sit down, send them a response, and make it genuine. Make it something you really, really care about, even if it's just to thank them for asking for your opinion. And that's pretty much it for today. So I promise I'll get down off the soapbox now. They're not going to all be like this, but this is one I'm passionate about because I love the fact that we can impact this hobby in a positive way. And I know you guys want to do more when you fly. So this is a great way to let them know. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks an awful lot for watching. If you have any questions about anything I've covered, drop them in the comments below. I'll put links down below where you can actually read the regulatory changes they're considering. And I'll put a link down there where you can send your comments into them to let them know, hey, I think you're doing a great job, or hey, you should change this. And just do it. Take a minute to do it because it's really important to all of us. So thanks again for watching. Until next time, happy flying.